Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Jessica, and today we are going to be talking about the true crime case of Amelia Dyer. On Tuesdays, I do true crime videos, and every Saturday I post a deeper look into crime video. Those are basically about topics that revolve either around death or crime. This video is for educational purposes only. I would also like to say that I am not an expert. I have just researched this topic and pulled information together to make this video. I would also like to put a trigger warning here. We are going to be talking about the death of infants for the majority of this video. We will also briefly be talking about physical abuse, and we will be talking about someone having unaliving thoughts. If any of these topics are too much for you, I completely understand, and I will see you in another video. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. Amelia Dyer was born Amelia Hobley in 1836 in a small town near Bristol, England. Her father Samuel was a shoemaker who owned and operated his own shoe shop, and because of that, their family was well off, at least compared to others around that time. By no means was their family rich, but they didn't have to worry about food or clothes or even education. Her mother Sarah was a homemaker, and around this time, typhus was an awful epidemic, and it hit the Hobley family super hard. As a young child, Amelia witnessed her older sister die of typhus in 1841, and she also witnessed her younger sister dying at only a couple months old. Unfortunately, that's not all. Her mother also got typhus and had awful side effects. Her mother would experience extreme confusion, and a lot of times this would lead to her having really bad fits of rage. Even though Amelia was the youngest, she was the main caretaker for her mother, and unfortunately, this made her more susceptible to her mother's violence. When Amelia was 10, her mother succumbed to the typhus and she died. After her mother died, Amelia's father sent her to live with her aunt in Bristol, England. As you could imagine, this move was hard for Amelia. She lost contact with most of her family. She lost her older sister, a younger sister, and her mom, all to severe health issues. And now she was living in a place that she didn't know. At this time, she just wanted to be with her family and get comfort from them, but that's just not how it worked. Instead of having her brothers and sisters and father to lean on, she was living with her aunt, and this caused a severe depression. As I'm sure you could imagine, this little girl, 10 years old, she's been through a lot. Over time, though, Amelia did find happiness. While in school, she loved reading and writing, and she often wrote poems and other short stories. And as a teenager, she became an apprentice to a corset maker. In 1859, at the age of 23, Amelia's father died. This led James, the oldest brother, to take over the family business. And just a year later, she met her soon-to-be husband. This man was George Thomas. He was in his 50s and he was a widower. But at the time, Amelia, she was only 24. Despite their age difference, they fell deeply and passionately in love. In no time, they were married. It's believed that when they got married, they didn't want to start a scandal. So when they were doing the paperwork, George knocked down 11 years of his age, and Amelia brought up her age by 6 years. Together, they had a daughter named Ellen, and things were going great. She was super happy, their daughter was happy and healthy, and Amelia decided that she wanted to change her career. So she decided she wanted to get into nursing. And because of this, George did what any good husband could do. He helped her get into nursing school. While in nursing school, Amelia specialized in midwifing. Being a midwife? Midwifing. Yeah, we'll go with that one. It was here that she met Ellen Danes, who was in the baby farming industry. And this really caught Amelia's eye because Ellen was making so much money. Amelia was interested in the baby farming industry, but she didn't really know if it was for her. Unfortunately, very shortly after, her husband died unexpectedly, leaving her with no income and 2 mouths to feed. So Amelia turned to baby farming. Okay, so what is baby farming? I'm so glad you asked, and here we go. Baby farming was an industry that boomed when the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 passed. Basically, this law exonerated men from having any kind of requirements to take care of their illegitimate babies. This led all the unwed mothers to have to figure it out on their own, of course. This kind of stuff always happened. There's so many laws, especially back then, that passed that protected men and left women out to figure it out. That just goes to show women are superior. Unfortunately, though, this led the unwed mothers to really only have 3 options. One was starvation. 2 was going to work in the factories, and they would still have to find a place to bring their babies so they could be watched during the day, which a lot of times they would have to pay the majority of what they made from that day. And the third option, baby farming. Usually, these women would find baby farming advertisements in the newspaper. So, pretty much, the baby farm would take in the baby for a fee and either adopt the baby out or put them into foster care so that way when the mother became more financially stable, she could get her baby back. When they adopted the babies out, they would also receive a fee from the family that was taking them in. Unfortunately, though, this wasn't always the case. Other times, baby farmers would still take in the babies and receive the fee from the mother and either drug, starve, or smother the babies. Of course, the mothers had no idea that this was happening. Usually they would present themselves as someone who was very kind and warm and nurturing. And when they came back for their babies or called to get an update, they would either say that their baby died from unknown or natural causes, or the baby farm itself would just get up and disappear. Sometimes, too, they would also say that the baby could have been adopted out, but that was almost always a lie. Unfortunately, this is the route that Amelia took, and her crime started the same year her husband died in 1869. Amelia lived in Bristol, but she would often travel to pick up babies from mothers in need all the way to Liverpool and Plymouth. She would usually charge in between 10 to 80 pounds to these mothers to take in their babies, which in today's terms is anywhere from $1,000 to $8,000. If the father was involved or if the mom came from money, then she would always charge more for the babies. However, if the mother came from a poor area and had no family to support her, that's when she would only charge the 10 pounds. When meeting with prospective mothers, she was always well-spoken, well-mannered, and carried herself with a lot of confidence. She would also usually tell them that she was married and a nurse who specialized in taking care of babies. This made it so that way the moms and the families felt more comfortable giving their babies to her. Amelia would set up weekly payments with these mothers. That way she had a consistent amount of income that was coming in. Only she wanted more. So she started taking in more babies than she could manage. And no one knows if it was intentional or not intentional, but babies started dying. As the babies were dying, she learned how much cheaper it was and how much more profit she was able to keep if she didn't have to feed the babies, change the babies, or spend her time taking care of them. This is when everything took an awful turn. It's believed that Amelia started with the most common tactic of baby farmers at the time. It's called a mother's friend. It was an opium-laced syrup that she would give to the babies. It would curb their appetite and calm them down so they wouldn't cry nearly as much. Of course, though, this concoction was poisonous. It caused a lot of babies to die. Well, when the babies would die, she did what most people did, and she called the coroner. When the coroner would come to confirm the death and take their bodies, she would always act like she was consumed with grief and in utter and complete shock. It didn't take long for the coroner to get suspicious, though, and he took that suspicion to the authorities. So the same year she started, she was charged with child neglect. Yeah, just child neglect. She was sentenced with 6 months in a work camp. Yeah, just killing babies left and right, and she is charged to work for 6 months? While in the labor camp, though, Amelia went through a severe depression, just like she did as a kid. During these 6 months in the labor camp, she attempted to unalive herself twice. And throughout the years, she would commit herself into mental hospitals at different times, depending on how she mentally was handling life. However, it's believed that she did this just so that way she wouldn't get caught. It just so happened a lot of times when she would commit herself, the police were getting on to her. Some others believe that she would commit herself into mental hospitals so that way she could plead insanity if she ever get caught, but we will talk about this a little more later. Well, after the 6 months was up, she was released and went right back into baby farming. She learned from her imprisonment, but not for the better. She did learn not to include coroners in any of the deaths. Instead, she would dispose of the bodies herself, usually in different ways, so that way she wouldn't set up a pattern for herself. She would throw them in rivers, bury them, and even just plop them in the middle of town. She would also kill them in different ways too, so that way again, she wouldn't be setting up a pattern for herself when bodies were found. When parents came back asking for their baby, she would usually hand them another baby because typically the babies she took in were usually murdered within a couple hours. Another thing too was when she felt like the police were onto her or people were going to start calling the authorities, she would just pick up and leave and change her name. Or another one of her resorts was to commit herself into a mental hospital. She did try to take her own life by injecting herself with that opium-laced syrup. However, she was an alcoholic and she took a lot of drugs, so her tolerance was much higher, of course, than the babies, and that attempt was failed. Okay, so my little mental health sidebar. I do think she suffered with depression. I do think depression medication would have helped. I know at this time, though, mental health wasn't considered what it is now. But because mental health wasn't what it is now, back then, I do understand why a lot of people just thought that what she was doing was a ploy, that it wasn't real. I genuinely do think, though, that these mental health issues were absolutely real. But depression and medication, it can't stop murder, okay? Like, what she was doing was wrong. There was definitely something deeper in there. Either way, though, she was an utter and complete monster. Okay, done with my sidebar. Let's get back to the story. 3 years later, after her husband died, Amelia remarried to a man named William Dyer, who was a laborer in Bristol. Together, they had 2 babies, a boy and a girl. I'm not sure how long they were married, but eventually Amelia did leave William. Now, she was left with 3 children full-time. She had Ellen from her first marriage and Polly and William now from her second. I know what you're thinking. She was killing a lot of babies, but she let her children live. She loved them and let them grow up. And unfortunately, I'm sure that they saw so much in that house. One day, as her children were getting older, one of her daughters asked, "Where did the babies go?" And she told them, quote, "I'm sending them to Jesus. He wants to see them more than their mothers do. I am the angel maker." What? Like, that had to traumatize the kids. So for years, she used different manners to murder and dispose of all of these bodies. But the most common method that she used was white tape and the Thames River. This is where I'm going to be getting into just a little bit of detail, so if you don't want to be hearing as many details right now, you can skip forward about 15 seconds. Amelia would use white edging tape to suffocate the babies. She would take the tape, wrap it tightly 3 times around their neck, and then with the remaining length of the tape, she would tie a very firm knot. As these poor little infants were suffocating, she would just set them down and walk away and wait for them to be silent. This is a hard one. Her daughter Polly and Polly's husband eventually joined in these horrendous acts. Once the babies passed, they would wrap the bodies in trash bags or some kind of packaging, usually put something heavy like a brick in with the packaging, and toss them into the Thames River at night. Again, there are multiple methods that she used. This is just one of the most common methods that they did to dispose of the bodies. In her prime baby farming days, it's believed that she would bring in a total of 6 babies a day. I'm sure you guys can imagine how many babies actually perished because of this awful woman. In March of 1986, a bargeman was working on the Thames River and saw a package floating. So he took his boat over there and he picked it up out of the water. When he opened it, he saw an infant girl's body inside. See, this is where Amelia messed up. They forgot to weigh it down. Not only did they not weigh the bag down, but they also messed up on the packaging that they used. They got careless, and Amelia's name and address was on the package. However, the name that was on it was Amelia Thomas, which was one of her aliases, but Not a good one, because that was her name from her first marriage. And she lives in the same area, so they could have definitely found her based on that. Either way, the police went to the address that was written on the package. But the address that they went to was actually her previous address. But not to worry, because her neighbors heard the commotion of what was happening and they stepped outside and saw the police. The police asked if the woman was still living there and they said no, but they had her new address. So the police went and made their way to her new address and they raided that place. Amelia wasn't there, but as soon as they got inside, they smelled the scent of decomposing bodies. The scent was overwhelming, and they searched and they didn't find any bodies, so they couldn't charge her for murder then. But the police did find yards of the same tape she used, pawn tickets for baby clothes, receipts for newspaper advertisements, telegrams arranging adoptions, and letters from mothers asking for updates on their children. However, because they didn't find any bodies, they couldn't arrest Amelia for the murders of these children. And it wasn't illegal to run baby farms, but they were off to go find her. They knew that their only chance of stopping her was to find her and get a confession out of her. So they set up a trap that she couldn't refuse. They set up a trap in the newspaper. They wrote up an ad that was from a mother looking for a home for her baby. And of course, Amelia responded. She set up a meeting place with the woman. When Amelia went to the meeting place, she was ambushed by police and arrested on the spot. While in custody, the police dredged the Thames River and found 6 more bodies that were all in the same conditions as the first one that was found. All of them had the white tape around their neck. And during an interview, she said, "That was how you could tell they were one of mine." During the interrogations as well, Amelia argued that her daughter Polly and son-in-law were innocent and had nothing to do with these baby murders. However, they were involved. Amelia's trial began 2 months later in May of 1896 at the Old Bailey Courthouse. And in this trial, she was only being charged for one murder of Doris Marmon. Just one. Just baffling. Amelia did plead guilty to Doris's murder. However, of course, she tried the insanity plea that we mentioned earlier. She made sure to mention all of her trips to the different mental hospitals and her attempts in unaliving herself. This did help to push the narrative a little further that they were trying to say that she was mentally insane. However, the jury, the court, and all the people that lived in that community just saw this as a ploy, that she was being calculated and that she figured that one day she would be caught and this would be the perfect opportunity for her to try to get away with it. The police even had her daughter Polly speak out during the trial about the events that occurred. They told Polly that if she gave detailed explanations that she wouldn't be prosecuted for this too. So that's what Polly did. As you could imagine with these horrific events, this became national headlines. People were flabbergasted. I mean, they were baffled and angry, and all they wanted to do was see her be put to death. When it was time for the jury to make their verdict, they went back and talked about it, and it only took them 4.5 minutes to come up with their verdict. They all decided that Amelia was guilty, and she was sentenced the death penalty. About a month later, on June 10th, 1896, Amelia Dyer was executed via hanging just before 9 a.m. Her last words were, quote, "I have nothing to say," end quote. All right. The exact number of victims that Amelia had could never be confirmed. However, she was doing baby farming for about 30 years. And considering the amount of babies that she averaged daily, it's estimated that Amelia Dyer took the life of 300 to 400 babies. After the execution, of course, people were still horrified and angry. They protested and they pushed for the government to change their laws. And this happened. The British government decided to reevaluate their adoption laws. They hunkered down on baby farming to stop the abuse. This was proven not to be easy, and it took a long time for them to fully abolish baby farms completely. Okay, so I like to end the videos on some kind of interesting note. There's actually a theory that Amelia Dyer may have been Jack the Ripper. Personally, though, I don't think that Amelia could have been Jack the Ripper because I'm pretty sure her hands were plenty full. I honestly don't think she would have had time or really the necessity to go after and attack women when her main victim choice were infants. And based on her average number every day, I can just imagine that she was in no short supply. But what do you guys think? Should we change Jack the Ripper to Jackie the Ripper or even Jill the Ripper? I don't know. This case was definitely heavy. It was a lot while I was researching it. Really, any case that has to do with children is difficult to get through. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for all of you watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider subscribing. Also, if you guys have any case suggestions you would like me to cover, please put them in the comment section down below. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye! Nope. 4.5 minutes. Woo! Emotional damage.